I joined Her Majesty's Customs and Excise in 1961, which of course is another era. The first thing that happened was that I was issued with a cake of cheap soap and an even cheaper towel, and that was for my personal use. The department that I joined was a very, very male department. There was one woman in a moderately senior position, an assistant secretary. In the outdoor service, there were no customs officers, female customs officers, other than a few females who were there to search women passengers. No female excise officers, no female purchase tax officers. So I was quite a rare beast for customs and excise. And I was pretty nervous about it. In practice, however, I met almost nothing but kindness and encouragement from this very male-dominated department. I can only think of one opportunity which was denied to me, and that was to be the number 2 private secretary in the Chancellor of the Exchequer's office, because he was concerned that as I had a 2-year-old son, he would be worried that I would be worried about the son if there were long hours. That's the only opportunity that I can remember that was denied to me, and in the end it didn't do any great harm. As to expectations, I think possibly because of my rarity value, the expectations of me were quite high. And the only person who needed to adjust their expectations upwards was me. Which I did. The main thing that changed, there were 2 big things that changed. The first was that women came into the department in much greater numbers round about the early 1970s. And the introduction of VAT was a real turning point, because the job was the kind of job that women could do and fit in with their home responsibilities. The other huge change, which applied, I think, across the civil service, was the introduction of family-friendly policies in a big way: part-time working, job sharing, much better maternity leave arrangements, career breaks, keeping in touch schemes, all of that. When I had my first child, the expectation was that you took 3 months off and you came back full-time. If I hadn't been prepared to do that, I'd have had to resign and hope to rejoin later. So that change to the facilities offered for women was an enormous one, and it made a very big difference to customs and excise and to the civil service as a whole. As to my mentors and advocates, as I've said, there was only one woman who was senior to me, and she was a rather stern lady, though she treated me extremely well when I worked for her. My mentors were male, and they were extremely helpful, giving me advice and encouragement. I can recall quite early on in my career, I must have been in the service for about a year or 2, saying to one of these older men, "I'm really enjoying this. It's going to be a shame to give it up when I get married and have a family." And he nearly fell off his chair laughing and said, "What on earth are you thinking of, woman?" And I had to readjust what I thought I ought to be doing. Fortunately, my husband was also very willing to readjust when we got married. It was a long career, so there were quite a few high points. The first was becoming a private secretary to a junior minister in the Department of Economic Affairs. Once he had realised that I wasn't actually a shorthand typist, he was extremely kind and helpful and trusted me to do all sorts of things, and that was a great developmental experience. Then introducing the red-green system of passenger clearance in the United Kingdom's ports and airports, which completely changed the way that passengers were dealt with when they came into the country. a big project and a real outcome that you could see at the end of it. Being part of the team which planned the introduction of value-added tax, a huge change again for the country because it impacted one way or another on every single business in the United Kingdom. Subsequently, running the VAT system. By then I was what was then called an undersecretary, running the VAT system, and that was my first experience of managing a very large number of staff, which I found I enjoyed absolutely enormously. Then, when the single market came in the early 90s, I was the chair of a group of senior officials from all around Europe working out the indirect tax arrangements for the single market. A very intensive period of negotiation, trying to understand what other countries' needs were, trying to make sure that the UK's needs and the needs of business were properly taken care of at the same time. And then being chairman of Customs and Excise, a great department, hugely varied, with staff that I really loved. Not every single one of them all the time, you understand, but the whole place very much was part of me, and I was part of it. So I had 7 hugely interesting years as head of Customs and Excise. Barriers, not really. And obstacles, I can't remember any. Indeed, being a woman at one stage actually stood me in good stead, because I was nominated to be the chair of the World Customs Organization, and I was nominated by the Malaysian representative. At that time, relations between Malaysia and this country were very tense. It didn't seem to make any difference in the rather odd world of customs. And he nominated me because, as he explained, she speaks very good English, and I think it's a good thing to have a woman. So on that occasion, at least, being a woman was extremely helpful. I don't think the obstacles are in the system. I think that the managers of the civil service over a number of years have made an honest and on the whole very successful effort to remove the systemic barriers. I talked earlier about the family-friendly policies. It's not obvious to me that the civil service could do more by way of system. I think such obstacles as there are probably somewhere in the culture, something to do with life itself. I suspect there are still people who refer to any woman in a senior position as a formidable lady. I've never heard anybody refer to a formidable man. And there are probably some people who, when they see a woman rising fast through the ranks, will say, of course, she's very ambitious, you know. They never say that about a man. And I think some of the obstacles are within women's own minds. I suspect there may still be a fear that if you do rise to the top, you will be regarded as not very feminine, somehow turning into a pretend man. And I think some women shrink from that. It's probably true also that you get to a point where you are very much in the public eye, and because you are female, you are even more in the public eye. When I became a permanent secretary, there were front page photographs of me in most of the broadsheets. Now that didn't happen to my male colleagues. That was a good thing in some ways, but it did mean that you're very exposed, and I think for some people that is pretty off-putting. But these are obstacles that can be overcome. In the end, you do the job, you do the best you can do, you make mistakes, and so does everybody else. I think the first thing I'd say is accept challenges when they're offered to you. I had a policy that when somebody asked me to try something new, I would say yes. And that's the first thing. look for opportunities. There were a couple of occasions where I thought there might be something I could do there, and I would say to the personnel department, if that opportunity comes up, I would be interested in it. And so that's the second thing. The third thing is about how you regard yourself. Don't try to be a pretend man. It's not true to yourself, and you will come unstuck. But also, don't be hung up about being a woman. It will occasionally have its minuses, though for me, I can't point to many. It will quite often have its pluses. Just be. If it's not an issue for yourself, then it's not going to be an issue for other people. That's my experience. For me, there were lots of best things about being in the civil service. For a start, it was about public service, and I very much enjoyed being part of public service. The range of work was very wide. There was the opportunity to do all sorts of different things, and only a really big setup like the civil service can give you that kind of breadth of opportunity. There was also a wonderful sense of comradeship with colleagues, and I'm not sure that you get that to the same extent in other areas of life. That was certainly one of the big attractors for me. And it is a good employer. It does offer opportunities. It does try to remove obstacles. So that for me is why I loved being in the civil service, why I never thought seriously about doing anything else whilst I was still within the system. Most of those things, of course, would be true for men as much as for women.
I'm Susan Scholefield. I'm Director General for HR and Corporate Services in the Ministry of Defence at the moment. So that's 86,000 civil servants who make up the fourth service in this department. I joined in 1981, did strategy, policy, procurement, finance jobs as you'd expect, then spent a year in France. I was Private Secretary to the Chief of Defence Procurement. Then had a fantastic series of jobs in the Prime Minister's Efficiency Unit, worked on the Bosnia and Northern Ireland peace processes, went to be Finance Director at Defence Procurement Agency, back to the Cabinet Office as Head of Civil Contingencies, and then I was Command Secretary at Northwood, a permanent joint headquarters during some quite tricky times on Iraq and Afghanistan. Well, when I joined in 1981, the civil service were the only employers who would give me an interview. I'd come from California, working in the university sector and a small business, and I landed in this country as an unemployed, single mum, divorced, and it was very hard to get an interview. We don't realise how things have changed, but I have to say the civil service earned my lifetime devotion. And I have always found them a caring employer. But when I first joined, my take-home pay didn't cover childcare. For 2 or 3 months, I was actually paying out more on childcare than I was earning. So the biggest change that I've seen that really has transformed people's lives has been workplace nurseries, not just for women but also for men, for working parents. And I think it's really important that as times get tough, we don't lose that kind of edge. Well, just look at the demographics at the moment. We've got an ageing population, and I think all of us, not just women but also men, are going to face some very, very heavy caring responsibilities. So I think for all employers, and for the civil service and for the Ministry of Defence, if we're going to achieve what we need to do in terms of our business, we're going to have really good flexible working arrangements that work for the employer as well as the individual. Well, I have to say it's been a fantastic career for me. I've done things I would never have dreamt of. People have encouraged my career, and they've often been men doing it. So in that sense, I feel the huge opportunity, really almost for the first time, as a woman, as a divorced woman, as a single parent, to have a career doing the kind of things I've been privileged to do. There have, though, been moments as I've worked in essentially a male-dominated workplace when people have said, what does this young woman know about anything? And young, well, I didn't dye my hair when I went grey quite early. That was Bosnia. Couldn't do much about being a woman. But in terms of what does she actually know about anything, I've always been absolutely determined to be completely professional in every role that I've had. And I think that has been absolutely critical as part of what is the fourth service in the Ministry of Defence. Well, when I joined in 1981, as I say, I think the civil service was better than many employers. They were the only people who would interview me. But I'd come from California, where there were amazing adaptations on the campus at the university for people with disabilities, attitudes towards women